At the dawn of the 20th century, the United States was at the height of the Industrial Revolution. As the world's leading industrial nation, the U.S. helped give birth to a new age of transportation with its advancements in railroad manufacturing.
He began producing the Pullman car, a classy, comfortable, even elegant way to travel the rails.
The introduction of railroads produced a ripple effect that was felt across the nation.
We had a reputation worldwide as the best rail travel in the world, and that was because of the quality of the Pullman sleeping cars.
The man responsible for harnessing the railroad's economic and industrial potential has a Chicago connection. In the latter end of the 19th century, railroads were the catalyst behind America's massive economic expansion. The agricultural and manufacturing industries rejoiced as they gained the ability to ship massive amounts of goods across the nation in record time. Railroads were in high demand, and it wasn't long before the industry expanded into commercial transportation. Commuter trains have evolved over the centuries since their invention. They are faster than ever, more accessible, and more comfortable. The man behind the commercial evolution of railcars was George Pullman.
George Pullman was a man of his times. He was born in New York. He came to Chicago to raise the Chicago Loop out of the mud. Chicago is a great spot for a city. The trouble is it was so muddy, the downtown had to be raised up out of the mud, and George Pullman was just the guy.
And the Pullman story is a fascinating chapter in American history because George Pullman, who developed Pullman, Illinois for his employees, manufactured the Pullman cars. And that's a term that became generic. Any sleeping car in the country became known as a Pullman.
George Mortimer Pullman was born in New York City, where he grew from humble origins. In 1859, he moved to Chicago. One day, while taking a commuter train and staying in the sleeping car, he was made so uncomfortable that he began thinking of ways to revolutionize the railway sleeping car. He foresaw the need for a professional class to have a clean, comfortable, and efficient form of transportation. Years of planning and investing paid off as Pullman premiered his first luxury car, the Pioneer. Word spread about the Pullman's luxury cars all the way to Washington. Soon, Pullman was honored to have his car transport the body of President Lincoln to its burial site in Springfield. The Chicago-based Pullman Palace Car Company was born.
What Pullman did is to modify a railroad car to emulate the sleeping quarters that were on the boats that were running on the Erie Canal, the overnight boats. And he put in the berths, the upper and the lower. That was the original Pullman. And you pull the drapes over. During the day, there were seats, and you would sit facing each other. And then the seats made down to the lower bed, and then the upper bed pulled out. That was George Pullman's invention and his contribution to American railroading.
The new luxury cars featured gourmet diner cars, chandeliers, and advanced heating and air conditioning. For Pullman, business was booming. He quickly became a Chicago household name.
The Pullman cars were built on an assembly line sort of deal. Different parts of the car would be assembled. The car would move along from station to station, getting upholstery, getting finishing, getting painted. The cars would come out into its finished state right here. So it was an interesting thing to see a car moving sideways. Then they would move the trucks, and it would be a fully functional train ready to go out on the tracks.
In 1880, Chicago was growing rapidly. Massive amounts of immigrants were coming into the city and were living in impoverished, overcrowded neighborhoods. Pullman saw this as a business opportunity. In 1880, Pullman purchased over 4,000 acres of land close to Lake Calumet, and the town of Pullman was born. Building well-furnished, modern homes out of brick, he envisioned a safe and clean place where his employees and their families could live. Stationed a stone's throw away from his industrial site, Pullman took employer commuting into account. At the center of town, Pullman even built the Hotel Florence, a hotel where Chicago tourists could stay while visiting the city. In just 13 years, the city of Pullman gained over 12,000 tenants. The town residents were his employees and their families. He did not allow his employees to join unions, and basic necessities such as groceries were methodically rationed. Ultimately, Pullman's vision of mixing workplace mentality and residential life backfired.
Well, let's just call him what he is. He was a control freak. He ran his house the way he ran the town. He was an autocratic, old school leader of men. And he decided he could get more control over his product, his Pullman car, if he had more control over the means of production.
So Pullman, with all of his inventiveness and all of the money he put in and all of his creativity, was a tyrant. He didn't treat it. He treated his people well, and he didn't.
Lots of men were working 12-hour days for hardly any money. And when unions began to come into the picture trying to get more money for the working man, the response of management was negative.
He built a marvelous community out there, but he charged a high rent so that he's paying you with one hand and he's taking the money back out of the rent with the next one. And if you couldn't pay, if you missed a payment, it came out of your paycheck.
He was really trying to extend his control, not just control of the factory and the factory floor. He wanted to control his workers, and he wanted to control the town.
The 1893 Depression forced the Pullman Palace Car Company to reduce wages and lay off many employees. To compensate for economic loss, Pullman raised the price of rent for his housing projects. Those who were fired were evicted from Pullman, and those who could not pay their rent were also evicted and ultimately fired. In 1894, the Pullman workforce had had enough. All of Pullman's employees went on strike. Outraged by Pullman's actions, the American Railway Union owner Eugene V. Debs called for all trains that carried Pullman cars to be barred from using railways. The result was violent. Riots erupted across the nation. Railroad cars were burned asunder and several citizens were wounded. Railroad traffic came to a screeching halt. Federal troops were called in to quell the violence and release the blockade the ARU had created against Pullman trains. Debs was arrested for his involvement in inciting the riots, but by the Pullman strike's end, enough damage had been done.
The fact that he was manufacturing the cars and running the cars for the railroads was too much of a monopoly for our way of doing business in this country. You couldn't make it and you couldn't own it and run it at the same time. So Pullman probably would not have had that happen if he had been less of a tyrant on the people who worked for him in Pullman, Illinois. Then there was the Pullman strike, where people went on strike for higher wages, and the government came in and he hired his own police, and they beat people, and there were some deaths, and it was a very, very bad labor situation. It was labor strife at its worst in this country.
As his empire came tumbling down, Pullman could not comprehend why his business model failed. He was said to have thought of his workers as his children and could not understand why they would rebel in such a way. In 1897, George Pullman died.
There's been talk among the family that he was clinically depressed after the strike. How healthy he was, we're not sure.
Fearing that his grave would be vandalized, he made special burial provisions at Graceland Cemetery. His reputation was tarnished, but he will always be remembered as a cunning businessman and a real estate visionary. His town and company went through significant change after his death. President Lincoln's son, Robert T. Lincoln, replaced George Pullman as the head of the town and company. Reorganized as the Pullman Company, the railcar manufacturer still produced its famous sleeper car. Unfortunately, with the birth of the automobile and eventually the commercial airplane, business met a sharp decline after the Great Depression. Pullman Incorporated closed its doors in 1957. In 1973, the historic Pullman Foundation was created to help ensure the area's preservation. Walking tours in the neighborhood are available to this day, and the area has even achieved Chicago landmark status. It will forever serve as a reminder for the most ambitious and unsuccessful social experiments Chicago has ever seen.